Hi, Year 10. For this week of work, we're going to be looking again at visual rhythms, that is repeats and patterns in architecture. And what I want to say about that, as we discussed in our live lesson last week, we don't have to have some fancy building in order to find repeats in architectural details. And in actual fact, just on the screen now, you can see a brick wall. That is a good enough repeat pattern for our purposes this week. Repetition is very pleasing to the human eye. We look for it, and depending on its frequency and its chromatic structure, that's in terms of how it uses colour. Repeated shapes and forms might actually soothe our senses. They calm us down. It's proven to lower our heart rate and slow our breathing, actually. But equally, certain kinds of patterns, for example, highly saturated stripy patterns, for example, are proven to make us feel perhaps quite uncomfortable, even agitated when we see them. So there's a lot to be said between the kind of correspondence between eye and brain and how we receive, interpret, and then understand and enjoy pattern. The power of pattern, of course, it's an aesthetic pleasure at time, and it's derived from observing repeated forms, really. We've looked at the series of photographs that links to this image on the screen before, where we have not just the repetition of an architectural form, but that form in itself also allows for a repeated sense of shadow or cast light that in itself enhances or adds to the pattern or the visual rhythm. So pattern has always really been understood by designers and visual artists. And actually, I've got an excerpt here from an academic paper that was a research article that appeared somewhere, I think at Princeton. It says abstract non-representational visual patterns such as those used in weaving, patchwork, embroidery, jewelry, etc. are produced in most, if not all, human cultures. Similar to music and language, such patterns seem to be a human cultural universal, not found in other species. So we really are the only species that create patterns for the purposes of kind of adornment or ornamentation. And it's not something that's exclusive to one particular culture. It's actually across all of humankind and also really across the whole span of human history. And in as much we could look back, way back into our Paleolithic ancestry and find evidence of pattern that had been used as a decoration, sometimes with great meaning as well, on, for example, vessels or artifacts. Your task today, and then going on through the week, I want you to go back. I know we talked about photographing brick walls before, but I want you to find as many repeating patterns and shapes in and around your homes, in school, if you're in the skeleton school throughout lockdown, or across the buildings you see if you're out walking, or even if you're going with parents or carers to do your essential shopping. I want you to make at least 4 photographs. If finding 4 different examples is impossible, of course we can approach this in a slightly different way. I would still like you to make a minimum of 4 photographs, but where the repeating pattern is viewed from a variety of angles. And of course, depending on the vantage point you shoot from, you're going to have a different sense or a visual currency to the pattern that you're recording. You're going to present that work on a new PowerPoint slide, annotating with reference to repeat patterns in architecture and architectural detailing. So that annotation is also increasingly important for us. Don't forget, for your GCSE, you are going to pick up extra points if you can explain why you are doing the thing you're doing. Now, of course, in connection to all the other photographs you will have been making, this kind of work is going to make sense. It's really about going into the sense of repeat pattern and detail in architecture, not forgetting that our general title for this part of our project is Sense of Space Architecture. And then the second part of the task, I've split into 2 different things. One part is to watch the interview that I conducted with Hussain AlMoosawi. He's a Dubai-based photographer and designer. I've put the YouTube link on there, but you're going to have to copy and paste it into your browsers. He is a very well-known, well-regarded typologist. So he is really, really kind of concerned with repeating type. And often we see evidence of his work where he's looked for distinctive shapes or colours that he finds many times over and then puts into a grid form. But actually the stuff I particularly want you to pay attention to is his architectural facades work. So we're looking at a photographer who lives in Dubai. He's in and around the UAE, but there's a lot of construction. There's a lot of building constantly happening to create shopping areas, to enhance and enliven the landscape in an otherwise pretty flat and arid location. So you can see on the screen there now, there he is, proudly standing in front of some really beautiful large-scale prints of some of the facades that he's been able to record in and around the UAE. Of course, we don't have access to those kinds of buildings where we are, but nonetheless, there still will be repeating patterns again in a lot of the buildings that you might encounter in and around Salisbury. But also, you know, just think even in your own homes, there may well be actually a sense that you've got repeating patterns in brickwork or in your patios, for example. Anyway, the second part of the task, task 2B, is to write an analysis of AlMoosawi's work based on what you can find about him on the internet, but also through watching the interview. I want you to compare what he does to the work of the artists we've already studied. So that would be people like Strand and, of course, Daniel Sig and Stefano Cirillo. Lots of different people we've been studying so far. To stretch and challenge you, I want you to also make some clear links between what AlMoosawi has been doing and then your own photographs that you're already producing in response to task 1. So that is your task or your task list for across this whole week. Please don't expect to finish it within the hour we have for our first lesson. This is going to stretch across all 3 lessons that we have this week. And then, of course, I do want you to make sure that you're uploading your work to Teams all the time and that you're adding to those PowerPoints. It's very important we remember that we have a kind of one-stop shop for all of our work, because whilst we're not in school, we need to make sure that we keep a record of what we've been doing. And that also, once we return to school, we've got a very simple point at which we can go to print your work and then simply use those PowerPoints actually as sketchbooks in their own right. So it just remains for me to say good luck, everybody. I will see you for a live lesson and a check-in on Tuesday. And I'm looking forward to seeing and reading what you produce.